Hello all. Today we will discuss the Restoration. In the English history, the period from 1660 to 1700 is called the Restoration period. It is also called the Age of Dryden. This was an era of change in political, social and literary fields. The period saw the reign of three rulers. The social life of this period was influenced by the French manners. There was also a change in literary taste during this time owing to the French influence. After the collapse of the Commonwealth and the Protectorate, the re-establishment of the monarchy happened in 1660. General George Monk, who was in command of the English forces in Scotland, entered London with his troops in February 1660 to lend his support to Parliament. The MPs excluded in Pride's Purge of 1648 were recalled and restored the Long Parliament. On 16 March, they dissolved the freshly revived Parliament and called for elections for a new assembly that would decide the nation's future. The assembly elected in March 1660 consisted of both House of Commons and House of Lords and was called the Convention to indicate that it had not been summoned by a monarch. General Monk met with Charles II, the son of the late King Charles I, and arranged to restore him. He fled to France after Cromwell's parliamentarians defeated royalists in 1646. On April 4, 1660, Charles II issued the Declaration of Breda, in which he made several promises in relation to the reclamation of the crown of England. On May 8, Charles II was declared king by convention and crowned at Westminster Abbey on 23 April 1661. The king brought back with him French manners, and France was the model for everything. The Restoration brought liberalizing social changes, including the reopening of the theatres and study of sciences that had been banned by the Puritans. Sports and dancing were revived. Science and learning received great royal encouragement during this period. Charles was a patron of the arts and sciences, founding the Royal Observatory in Greenwich and supported the Royal Society, whose members included Sir Isaac Newton and Robert Boyle. Two political parties, the Whigs and the Tories, started rising during this period. Two notable historical events occurred during Charles' reign, including an appalling plague in 1665 and was followed by the Great Fire of London in 1666, which destroyed a large part of the city, including St. Paul's Cathedral, which led to the substantial rebuilding of the City of London. Architect Sir Christopher Wren was commissioned to rebuild the cathedral and the whole city. He built the city in brick and stone. The last decade of Charles' reign was fraught by the issue of succession. It was a political episode known as the Exclusion crisis that ran from 1679 to 1681. Charles had no legitimate children, so Charles' brother, James, Duke of York, would inherit the crown after Charles' death. James had converted to Roman Catholicism. In a climate intensely hostile to Catholicism, the prospect of a Catholic succession to the throne was unpopular. Efforts were made to exclude James from the throne. In May 1679, a faction of Parliament led by Anthony Cooper, Earl of Shaftesbury, introduced a bill in the House of Commons with the intention of excluding James from the succession. Charles was angered at this bill, and Protestants in Parliament were angered at the king for supporting his brother. Charles sided with his brother, and he removed all obstacles for the accession of James. Charles dismissed the Parliament and ruled for the last 4 years of his reign without them. Charles died on 6 February 1685, having converted on his deathbed to Catholicism. James succeeded as King James II and was acceptable to the Parliament as long as his heir was his Protestant daughter, Princess Mary, who was married to her cousin, the Protestant William of Orange. Matters became worse in June 1688 when King James had a son who would be raised in Catholic faith. The birth of James' son changed the line of succession, and many feared a Catholic rule in England was imminent. James became unpopular within 3 years, and the whole nation rose against him. The Whigs, the main group that opposed Catholic succession, were especially outraged. The king sealed to revive Catholicism, his close relationship with France, his conflict with the Parliament, and uncertainty over who would succeed James on the English throne led to the revolt and ultimately the fall of James II. On June 30, 1688, a group of 7 Protestant nobles invited the Prince of Orange to come to England with an army. William landed in November 1688, promised to defend the liberty of England and the Protestant religion. James fled to France, where his Catholic cousin Louis XIV welcomed him and where he eventually died in 1701. Parliament met, denounced James, offered the throne to William and his wife Mary as joint sovereigns, and placed constitutionally significant legal and practical limitations on the monarchy. This was the Glorious Revolution or Revolution of 1688, also known as Bloodless Revolution. It was the least violent and yet the most beneficial of all revolutions. The cause of divine right theory was lost for good. Absolute monarchy was put an end and constitutional monarchy emerged. Before William and Mary could be proclaimed king and queen, Parliament proposed a Declaration of Rights and presented it to them. The English Bill of Rights was a restatement in statutory form of the Declaration of Rights presented by the Convention Parliament to William and Mary in February 1689. The bill did not pass until December. It was formally passed through Parliament after the coronation. It was designed to control the power of kings and queens. The Bill of Rights became one of the most important documents in the political history of Britain. It set down limits on the powers of the monarch and set out the rights of Parliament, including the requirement for regular parliaments, re-elections, and freedom of speech in Parliament. William and Mary ruled until Mary's death in 1694, and William continued until his own death in 1702. As Mary died childless, the couple had failed to begin a dynasty of their own, and the crown was passed to Mary's sister Anne upon William's death. Literature of the Restoration period was highly dominated by French culture. Theatres were reopened. The merry monarch Charles II and his nobles patronized theatres. Professional actresses were allowed on the stage for the first time. The masterpieces of Milton and Bennion belong to this period. This age also produced authors like Dryden, Congreve, etc., and the first female playwright of the English stage, Aphrabin. The Restoration was the time when John Milton produced his great works, Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, and the drama Samson Agonistes. Upon the monarch's restoration, Milton lost all government official charges and was even arrested, but was soon released. He became totally blind by that time. He continued writing with the help of assistants. Paradise Lost was written in beautiful blank verse and in 12 books. The scene is the whole universe, including heaven and hell. It tells the story of Satan's rebellion against God, his expulsion from heaven along with the rest of the rebel angels, and how he tempted Adam and Eve to eat the forbidden fruit and fall from grace. It is considered as Milton's masterpiece and one of the greatest poems in the world literature. Paradise Regained, a poem in 4 books, describes how Jesus overcame the temptations of Satan, thereby passing on humanity's behalf the test which Adam and Eve failed. Samson Agonistes is a tragedy on the Greek model. It describes the sorrowful last days of a blind prisoner, Samson, in the hands of the Philistines. Some of the sorrowful expressions of Samson reflect Milton's own personal feelings. The Restoration poetry was mostly satirical, realistic, and written in heroic couplet. John Dryden was the dominating figure of the Restoration period. He made his marks in the field of poetry, drama, and prose. Following Cromwell's death, Dryden published Heroic Stanzas, a group of verses that celebrated the achievements of Cromwell. The poem Astrea Redux in heroic couplets celebrated Charles II's return from exile and restoration to the English throne. In 1667, he published Annus Mirabilis, the Year of Wonders, a lengthy poem which described the English defeat of the Dutch naval fleet and the Great Fire of London in 1666. It established him as the preeminent poet of his generation. Dryden was appointed Poet Laureate in 1668 and Royal Historiographer in 1670. Of his political satires, Absalom and Achitophel and the Medal are well known. An attempt by the Earl of Shaftesbury and others to exclude Charles' Catholic brother James from the English throne provided Dryden with the topic for Absalom and Achitophel, which is one of the greatest political satires in the English language. Dryden defended the king against the Earl of Shaftesbury, who is represented as Achitophel. The medal, which again aimed at Shaftesbury. His Mac Ligno is a satirical poem about a fellow poet and a contemporary of Dryden named Thomas Shadwell. It is both a personal and literary satire. In 1682 appeared his Religio Laici defending the Anglican Church. 3 years later, when James II came to the throne, Dryden turned Catholic and wrote his famous poem The Hind and the Panther. In this, he defends Catholicism. Dryden's Alexander's Feast is one of the best odds in the English language. It was written in the year 1697. He wrote it in celebration of Saint Cecilia's Day. The poem is about the power of music. One of his finest literary achievements was a collection of new translations of classical and medieval poetry, published together with some of his own original poems. This volume, entitled Fables Ancient and Modern, was published in 1700. In this, he translated works by Homer, Ovid, Boccaccio, and Chaucer. Samuel Butler is the author of the famous poem Hudibras. It is a satire on Puritans. It is modeled upon the Don Quixote of Cervantes. Butler published it in 3 volumes between 1662 and 1678. The Restoration marks the development of a new type of prose. The new prose encouraged clearness of thought and plainness of expression. Dryden was one of the greatest prose writers of this period. His prose writings consist of essays and prefaces. Dryden became the foremost critic of his age. Dr. Johnson called him the father of modern English criticism. The best known of these criticisms are Preface to the Fables, Discourse on Satire, of Heroic Plays, and Essay of Dramatic Poesy. In Essays of Dramatic Poesy, Dryden deals with the principles and merits of 3 chief types of drama: the classical drama of the Greeks and Romans, the neoclassical drama of the French, and the romantic drama of the English. John Bunyan was a prose writer of Puritanism. He suffered imprisonment for propagating Puritanism. During this period of imprisonment, he wrote his spiritual autobiography, Grace Abounding to the Chief of Sinners. His Pilgrim's Progress, one of the great allegories, was written during the second imprisonment. It was published in 1678. The story takes the form of a dream which treats in an allegorical manner the life of a common man called Christian. The first part deals with the Christian's journey from his birthplace, the city of destruction, to the celestial city. On his way, he encounters many dangers and allegorical personages like worldly wise man, talkative, giant despair, etc. It tells the trials, tribulation, temptations, and ultimately reaches his goal. The second part describes the pilgrimage of Christian's wife Christina and their children. It was published in 1684. His other works include The Life and Death of Mr. Batman and The Holy War. It is also an allegory. John Locke is the author of great philosophical work, The Essay Concerning Human Understanding. This is a study of the nature of the human mind and of the origin of ideas. He is regarded as the founder of a school of thought known as British Empiricism. 2 treatises concerning government is his famous political work. The Reasonableness of Christianity is his major work in theology. The Diary of Samuel Pepys is probably the most famous diary in English language. It is an important historical document which provides a detailed account of both high politics and ordinary experience in key decade in English history. Begun in January 1660 and finishing in May 1669, it includes account of important events like coronation of King Charles II, the Great Plague, the Great Fire of London, and many more. It also includes everyday domestic details, giving historians insight into how ordinary people lived and thought during the period. His diary could not be read until 1852 because it was written in secret signs. 2 forms of drama got recognition during the Restoration period. One is heroic play and the other is Restoration comedy or the comedy of manners. The influence of French romance and drama produced its first important result in the form of the heroic play. Heroic plays are also known as heroic tragedies. In these plays, love, gallantry, and courage were depicted on a grand scale. They were written in heroic couplets. Dryden was a famous dramatist of Restoration period. He was the principal master of heroic drama. Dryden's heroic plays are The Indian Queen. It is a collaboration with Sir Robert Howard, his brother-in-law. The Indian Emperor, The Conquest of Canada in 2 parts. Tyrannic Love or the Royal Martyr, Aurangzeb, All for Love or The World Well Lost. It is based on Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra. The Restoration comedy is also known as comedy of manners. Restoration comedy depicts morally corrupt characters. It satirized the mannerisms, behavior, and ideas of the upper class. The moral degeneration of Restoration comedy shocked contemporary moralists. It was considered immoral due to consistent attack on the sanctity of marital bond and growing preference for free love. Most of the writers were openly writing and portraying promiscuous scenes in the drama, which is considered as a corruption of morality. Comedy of manners originated in France with Molière, who used this comic form to correct social absurdities. In England, the comedy of manners is represented by the plays of William Wycherley, George Etheredge, William Congreve, John Vanbrugh, and Afra Ben. George Etheredge's popular play is The Man of Mood. Wycherley's best plays are The Country Wife and The Plain Dealer. The most gifted playwright was William Congreve. His masterpieces are Love for Love and The Way of the World. Vanbragh's best comedies include The Relapse, The Provoked Wife, etc. Ben was the first professional female playwright of the English stage. The Rover or The Banished Cavaliers is Aphra Behn's most famous play, written in two parts. Thomas Shadwell became poet laureate after the Glorious Revolution. His comic plays included The Sullen Lovers or The Impertinents, produced in 1688. His best plays are Epsom Wells and The Squire of Alsatia. That's all for today. Thank you for watching.